change management and your communication through change needs to hit both your sponsors and other people within the organization who are touched by the change. They need to be brought on board. They need to be brought into the fold and feel like they're part of that journey. Otherwise, those who have resisted your change will also, experience this risk-averse rejection of what you're pushing, and will push you, and they won't tell you necessarily why it is that they don't disagree, or even perhaps that they disagree, or the problems that they see along the way. If they're not telling you those things, you as a lead of that project, you're never going to be able to course correct. You don't even know you're off track.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation.
And today our guest is Alyssa Cox. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here, talking about a subject that is confusing for some, but definitely interesting for maverick leaders. But before we get there, who are you?
Well, my name is Alyssa Cox. I am an organizational effectiveness coach, and facilitator and speaker. And what I do is I help people think through what are the small changes that they can make in their teams, in their sort of their personal, professional careers, in their organizations, to really unlock productivity. And, one of the things that I talk to people about a lot is, what is your relationship with things that didn't go so hot? How do you think about those things, and how do you move forward, and how do you apply a continuous mindset, a continuous improvement mindset to those things?
And what do they say?
Most people say, I'm really good at learning from my mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And my organization is really bad at it. And I
was waiting for the boot to fall from the other foot there.
That's right. So, a lot of times the way we approach learning from failure and and the word failure is so loaded, right? Like, a lot of times we hear failure and like, well, failure is just an unallayed bad. And that's not the case all the time. There's big failure, there's catastrophic failure. And then there are like the little things that didn't go the way you wanted them to. And it's the way we approach those little things that didn't go the way we want them to that helps us prevent some of those big catastrophic failures. But a lot of times our attitude toward failure, toward those things that didn't go so hot, is really tightly correlated to our attitude toward risk.
Mm. Yeah. And also learn from a very early age, isn't it?
That's right. Psychological safety is a big topic in organizations today. And psychological safety is all about your ability in the organization, your comfort within your team, within your organization, to provide constructive feedback, to provide contrary perspectives, and to bring sort of your perspective to the workplace without fear that you're going to get punished for it, right? And it's going to be that the pushback to your comment is going to be personalized. And when we talk about fearing failure and that being a learned behavior, and fearing risk, it's all about fear for sort of your personal status, and fear for the behavioral punishment associated with having admitted to yourself and others that things didn't go very well.
Yeah, I get that. That's so interesting, because I guess it's learned from an early age. I don't know. You try to do something, were your parents encouraging, or were they like having a go because you failed? But also, do you think it comes from the way that school systems are changing, where they're going from even a broad education to teaching you to pass tests? So therefore, if you're not passing the test, you're failing, rather than you've learned something useful that you can apply the next time.
That may be part of it. As I look at schools, and so we're here in the States, and as I look at schools and what has changed in schools that might be driving an increase in this behavior, from my perspective, it is more about increases in class sizes, decreases in resources for teachers, if you want to coach someone to have a productive continuous improvement mindset, that takes some one-on-one attention. That takes a really supportive environment. And that requires teachers and teaching aides who are deeply supported and have what they need to bring all of their resilience and productivity to work. And clearly, coming through the pandemic and even beyond, this is not the case for teachers here, right? Many teachers sort of across the country are feeling under-supported. And so as they have these feelings, it's very hard, I think, and harder every day to deal with the expanding size of classes. So more and more kids with fewer and fewer resources, both financial resources as well as sort of the personal bandwidth to help kids stay as productive as possible and to help them learn on a one-on-one basis how to think through, in a socially safe environment, continuous improvement.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does that play out in the work environment then? Because I don't know about in the States, but certainly in the UK, they've had the Kaizen movement back in the day, continuous improvement, but it didn't coincide with the previous fad of learning organisation. So it was almost everyone's got the learning organisation, and we've done that. Then it's Kaizen, and then it's kind of, I had an interesting time talking to someone who works in an innovation hub, but they're so frightened of failing. And it's quite ironic because you can't innovate without failing.
Well, I mean, the Kaizen approach posits that where no problem is perceived, there can be no improvement. But if we look at status reporting in our organizations that are, we'll call them risk inclined, these are organizations that know that you're going to try something hard and sometimes it's not going to pan out. And the sooner you show up and say, hey, this is not panning out, or you say, hey, I need help, the sooner we can get you back on track, or just stop the program and redirect your energy elsewhere. Risk averse organizations. And so like in risk inclined organizations, you'll see status reports go from green to yellow before they go red. And you'll see, if you listen to the conversations around those status reports, there's some time, certainly everyone wants to talk at some point about like, why are we here? How did we get here? But more importantly, a big part of that conversation is, what can I do to help you? What needs to happen next? In risk-averse organizations, these are organizations where we are encouraged both explicitly and implicitly to stay in our lane and do things the way we always have. And while you might celebrate success, oftentimes failure is criminalized. And you can see that when you have status reports that go from green to flaming red with no at-risk in between. This is people who are trying to hide the little things that are going wrong, not because they're trying to be deceitful, but because they're trying to fix them by themselves so they don't get punished. Right? And so that's a real problem.
Yeah, it is a real problem. But what's interesting as well, it's not just an organizational one, is it? Because leaders have the same inclinations, don't they? Where you have maverick leaders who are risk inclined, acceptable risks. And so therefore they'll literally go out hunting for that minute detail that's not working so that they can get it right. And they're not worried about exposing it. And they teach their team it's okay to expose what's going wrong because ultimately that serves the greater good. And so you will see, I guess, more honesty in the KPI when you're looking from the red and the amber and the green. And then you've got those maybe either the managers that don't know how to drop their ego or are suffering from being in the blame culture. Who kind of, it's not psychologically safe for them to have a yellow. And if it goes to a red, it's an immediate blame. I remember years ago, I was a senior manager and it was a massive national chain. And every Tuesday morning, every location had this thing that had to be calculated and worked out how productive it was. And if it worked out that it was right, life was good. If it turned out that you were even 1 point off of what it was predicted, the immediate response was to start looking for the blame criteria, rather than just saying, oh, this happened. And the reason it happened like that was because it would start with the board would look and see the metric and go, that particular location is off by 1. Why is that? And it would hit every senior manager in the chain until it got down to the location. So, and then once they found, they could pin it on one person who may be relatively junior, then the excuse will then go back up. So it'd be like, your job's at line, all the way down to, why did you cock this up? And then it was like, oh, because of X. And then it's like, your job is safe, going up the chain. And that's no way to live, because you had all these people, worried for their positions for something that they ultimately couldn't control.
And what's particularly toxic in those environments is that people will name those environments performance-driven cultures.
Yeah.
And accountability cultures, when it is actually, to your point, it's a culture of blame.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at, and there are some really noteworthy organizations that have sort of cracked the code on celebrating failure. I mean, Pixar, right? If you don't love a Pixar movie, you must live under a rock, right? Pixar has this like institutionalized candor that they've built into their creative process. Like they had these brain trust peer reviews where directors and storytellers who aren't involved in a project look at early versions of a movie and they provide constructive suggestions and feedback, and they seek out what's failing on the project. And, their perspective is every movie early in its creative cycle kind of sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to take our opportunities to fix them. Let's find what's not working, provide that feedback and fix it rather than punishing people for something that's not working. And the only thing that they then is sort of a terminal offense. It's not a terminal offense to say, hey, this movie is not working and we need to just pull the plug. The terminal offense is a director who says, no, it's going, it's good, and loses the confidence of their team and allows this sort of rolling failure to continue to perpetuate until they're basically the only person driving it forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see people, organizations or teams pushing for a solution which no one's really that confident it's going to really solve the day, but it's highly visible against the risk of doing something that's not highly visible to the powers that be that would solve it.
Yeah. And a lot of times the perspective is, if you can change the mind of the right person, then everybody else is going to need to follow along, right? When we start talking about change and, you want to drive a big change, you want to implement perhaps a new system or a big process change, there is this perspective, and it's seductive, right? Because it is the perspective that if I can find the right champion, everybody else will fall in line behind that person.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not the case, right? Change management and your communication through change needs to hit both your sponsors and other people within the organization who are touched by the change. They need to be brought on board. They need to be brought into the fold and feel like they're part of that journey. Otherwise, those who have resisted your change will also, experience this risk-averse rejection of what you're pushing, and will push you, and they won't tell you necessarily why it is that they don't disagree, or even perhaps that they disagree, or the problems that they see along the way. If they're not telling you those things, you as a lead of that project, you're never going to be able to course correct. You don't even know you're off track.
So is there a power then from learning from failure? And if there is a power, what is that?
I mean, when we talk about learning organizations, we spend so much time in training,
Mm-hmm.
right? But just over the last 10 years, we went from 39 hours on average of like structured training within our organizations per person to 64. That's a ton of time that you're pouring. it's almost a whole week that you're pouring into structured training. But every single day, you have an opportunity to take a step back, identify what maybe didn't go as well as you might have wanted, articulate what the problem is and what needs to be better next time, and then think through how you're going to get there. And this is how you make then incremental change every day that leads to better, more productive outcomes. And when you start as a team leader to do this with your team and to encourage this attitude toward continuous improvement with your team in a safe place where it's okay to talk about that presentation went fine, but here's what could have gone better. I mean, here you are now laddering up not only yourself, but your entire team over time. And it is teams of excellent people that do the most excellent work.
Mm. So what mindset do people need to have to be able to learn from failure?
I come back to this attitude of psychological safety, right? You need to have a mindset and the supporting culture around you to identify what's going on, be self-critical, not in a damning way. We're not talking about negative self-talk, right? Negative self-talk is the sort of the very definition of getting stuck in retrospective and a personal environment without psychological safety. I mean, you're beating yourself up for things that did and perhaps maybe even didn't happen. But doing the minor retrospective, doing the analysis to say, what could have gone better? I know I'm worth it. So let's make sure that I express that by taking the time to learn and by asking for help. I don't always know what went really well in a given presentation, but I can tell you that my audience has a perspective. Go grab that perspective. Go find your mentors, find your advisors who can give you a perspective on what you could be doing differently and how to do that. It is the mindset that you're looking for here is one of a belief that you can improve. So leave the negative self-talk elsewhere. Believe that you can get better. And then understanding what your next steps are to learning what you need to do and to then actioning what you need to do to get better in big ways and also in little ways every day.
That makes sense. So how does an organization make it happen? How do they make psychological safety a thing that's obvious?
It comes from the top down and from the bottom up. And from the top down, as you're sitting with teams that are reporting out to you, and you're asking the question, what can I do to help? And then following up and providing that help that you've committed to doing, coming up with a plan and then acting on that plan in a very public way. These are the things that contribute to your reputation as a trustworthy leader.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking through the way you respond to others, taking a pause to respond instead of just reacting. These are things that you can do to try to manage some of that knee jerk that can be quite personalizing. And then also making sure that when you're providing feedback, it's not personalized. It's about the work. From the bottom up, right? As I'm leading a team within my organization, right? There are three things that sort of really tactical things that I like to advise team leaders to do. And, we're going to go through them and it's like, obviously, yes, of course, but are you doing them? Maybe not. Right. And so one of them is, again, bring failure to light early and often, right? Like make a regular habit of exploring what didn't go according to plan and start with like small reflections on individual meetings, individual interactions, individual presentations. But it's ultimately you're building this reflective skill that you can apply to the analysis of larger, more complex situations. And having open conversations with your team about what could have gone better, both for them and for you. Model this reflective behavior out loud with your team So they know if it's safe for you to come and say these things to them, it's safe for them to say these things about themselves with you. And the other thing is make sure you move beyond that retrospective. Like, don't just get stuck there. Make sure in any of your conversations about what could have gone better, that you spend the majority of your time talking about course correction, talking about what help you need, talking about what resources you need to get back on track. And then finally, encouraging others to have these conversations with their peers. So as you're leading a team, you've got an associate that's working for you, that's trying something new or working on a new project, or is running into some roadblocks, perhaps on an existing project. Encourage that person to go talk to one of their peers who's done similar work. And specifically to ask, what could have gone better when you did this? What did you learn? What were your lessons learned? If you had it all to do again, what would you have done differently? This starts to normalize conversations between peers on things that didn't go as well as, not to say that the whole project was a failure, that the work that you did didn't succeed. That's not the conversation at all. But it's to say that even in your success, are there things you would have done differently? Are there lessons I should be learning from you to make sure my work is successful? And when you start to give people that language and encourage them to practice that language in those conversations, this is how, from the bottom up, you start to actually live into a supportive environment where we're learning from each other, from our own failures and from the failures of others.
Brilliant. Thank you. Before we end, is there something I should have asked you and you think, oh, that crazy woman should never ask me that? And if so, what is it? And then answer it.
I would say, if there's one more thing that you could have asked, a lot of times I get asked, like, what is your personal failure story? And that's a terrible question to get asked. Like, I hate that question, but it's really powerful because I keep talking about, being transparent about failure. And yet when I'm asked this question, I'm like, I don't really want to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
So, but I think it is an important question to ask. And so I'll tell you, right, the reason that I'm really passionate about this topic area is that, so I spent a good part of my career working for a major consultancy. And one of the things that we did really well was talking about all the stuff we were great at, right? And then we'd get on the ground, like we'd sell work, we'd get on the ground and we'd do our best, but you can't control everything. And sometimes things didn't go so hot. And so I was on one particular project that, it was really very challenging. I was on it for 2 years. And by many measures, right, it was an abysmal failure. Like that was $20 million that could have been spent elsewhere.
Oh, wow. Now, that's a lot of money.
It was a lot of money. And it was more and more money every day because we weren't transparent about, and not just like we as a consultancy, but between ourselves and our client organization, we were not transparent about what was not going right. Right. And so I learned a ton on that project. I'm better today than I was before that. And I'm really proud of the work that my team did. We did a ton of really great work. Afterwards, I found that I had a really hard time talking about those 2 years as part of my career journey, especially within the firm.
Yeah.
And so I give this story because I want people to understand that everybody is dealing with something that didn't go the way they wanted to, right? If you haven't had at least one thing today that didn't go the way you wanted it to, it's either very, very early in the morning or you're lying to yourself. Even on your best day, there's something that could have gone even just a little bit better. And so open the curtains a little bit, let people in and work with people, work with your peers, find your safe set that you can work with to identify those things and come up with ways to do them better next time. And don't be afraid to talk about it, right? Don't be afraid to share your failure stories. find the language that makes those stories safe for you and still meaningful.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think quite often people see us at the, in the middle or coming towards the end of journeys and not realizing, it had to start somewhere. We see Amazon today, but not Amazon in a small little office with a piece of paper saying Amazon on it, or, Steve Jobs in the garage. We all want to be this massive, major success without all the effort that goes into it. So that's fantastic, Alyssa. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jude. It's been great.
It's been fun. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. And I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Alyssa as much as I enjoyed having it.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.